Blessed is the man that walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits.
Well, hey everybody, I just want to welcome you back to Firm Foundations. Today we're going to be looking at Lesson 4, and I want to apologize, it's been a little while since I've recorded a video, but I'm glad to be back with you guys now. So we're going to have a little quick prayer, and then we're going to get into the lesson. Lord, thank you for time again that we can come to your word. I pray for everybody who's watching this video, we're going through this course with us, that you would be with them, that you would reveal your ways, and you would help them to know you. God, I pray, Holy Spirit, that you would be our teacher, that you would guide us into the way of truth, and help us to understand you more. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so the last time we met, we talked about the creation of the angels and kind of where the angels came from. And so just as a way of reviewing, as we get started today, let's just start with this question. If God is all-powerful and he doesn't need anything, then why did he create the angels? What was his purpose in creating them? You may recall that one of the roles that the angels have is to worship God and to serve him. So really that's the reason why he created them. He created them in order to worship him. Another thing we might think about is how angels are different from God. How are they not like God? They are limited, right? Because they are created beings. Only God is unlimited. But angels are limited beings. They are created. They were created at a certain time. So they're not eternal in the way that God is eternal. Angels also don't have the power to create anything, right? Only God is able to create things out of nothing. And angels are also limited in their knowledge. They don't know everything that there is to know. They're not, all-knowing in the way that God is all-knowing. And they're also limited in their ability to be only at one place at one time. They can't be everywhere at once. They're not what we say in theological terms, we say omnipresent, right? God can be everywhere at once. God can be here with me in this classroom, and he can also be there with you on the other side of this computer screen, wherever you are in the world, and God is with you and he is with me right here at the same time. Angels are not like that. They are limited to a certain place and time that they're allowed to be in. So these are just some differences between angels and God. Now, another thing that we want to remember is that not all of the angels are alike. They had different position and they had different power, maybe different kinds of responsibility that they had. Remember when we looked at a passage in Ezekiel, it sort of referred to the angel that is sometimes called Lucifer, or that we know now as Satan, as being an anointed cherub, a guardian cherub. So he had a position of being a guardian. And we know that when Adam and Eve were pushed out of Eden, that there were guardian angels put there. We know that some angels serve as messengers specifically. They come down and bring messages to human beings, just like when Mary and Joseph encountered the angel Gabriel. Another question to think about, just in a way of review, is just thinking about how God created the heavens and the earth. What did he use to create these things? Did he use anything at all? No. Everything was created out of nothing, right? We call this creation ex nihilo. It means that God created everything that is from out of nothing. He spoke and it came into being. And today, as we get into our lesson, you're going to see all of these different things that God spoke into being. So today we're going to start in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. And if you look with me at Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, it begins like this. It says, "And God said." Now you're going to notice today as we go through these passages that this phrase is repeated many, many times in Genesis chapter 1. Then God said, right? And what does that emphasize for us? That emphasizes that everything that was made by God speaking it into existence, right? He spoke these things into existence. So in this case, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, you can read it with me. It says, "And God said, let there be light. And there was light." Now another verse you may want to look at is Psalm 33. If you go to Psalm 33 and you look at verse 6, this is what it says. "By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, their starry host by the breath of his mouth. And then if you move down to verse 8 and 9, it says, let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the people of the world revere him. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. So what do all these verses emphasize? They emphasize that God spoke these things into creation. He spoke the world into existence. He commanded, and it was. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made. So Genesis 1:3, and God said, let there be light. He spoke light into existence, and it was. Now, the other thing that's very interesting about this passage is that God in this passage is creating light, but he hasn't created the sun yet. So this light is separate from the sun. The sun isn't even created until the fourth day. But God commanded the light to shine, and immediately there was light. Now that tells us something about God, right? It tells us, first of all, nothing is impossible with God. He can make anything that he wants. He can speak anything into existence. So if he says, let there be light, there is light. And it doesn't matter that there is no sun. There can still be light because he is God. And whenever we see the sun and the moon and the stars, whenever we flick on the light switch, we should remember that God, through his mighty power, created light, right? You and I, we don't have the capacity to understand how light comes into being. We're limited human beings. We can't possibly imagine that. But God, in his infinite knowledge and his infinite ability and his infinite power, is able to speak light into existence, and there is light. Now, why did God create light? Well, he created light because he is good and because he is creating a place that is designed for us to live on. And he knows that for us to live in darkness would be scary and terrible. We would be filled with fear if we were constantly in the darkness. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of being in total darkness, like if you go into a cave or something like that and you're deep down in the midst of the cave and all the lights are off and you can't even see your hand in front of your face. Okay, that is a moment that will be terrifying for you because suddenly you can't see anything. You can't even see your hand in front of your face because it's totally and completely dark. But God, out of his loving kindness, he created light for us because he planned on us. And so you're going to see as we go through all these steps of creation, this is God preparing a place for human beings. So God created the light, and the light was perfect because everything God makes is perfect because God is perfect. So he creates the light, and look at what it says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 4. It says, and God saw that the light was good, right? The light was good. Every time God creates something new, he says, and it was good, because everything that God makes is perfect, like God is perfect. In the beginning, all of these things are perfect. Now, you think about us for human beings, the products that we have aren't perfect, right? When you go and buy a new appliance or say like a vacuum cleaner at Carrefour or at a grocery store, you're hoping probably that item that you buy has some kind of insurance because it will probably maybe break down or have problems. It's not perfectly made, right? If I buy a new computer, I know that my computer is going to need to have some sort of insurance on it because it may have problems. It may break down because the things that we're able to make are not perfect. Only God can make things that are perfect in every way. And so you'll see as God creates these things, he says, this is good. And that just demonstrates that everything that God makes is perfect and faultless because God is perfect and faultless. It says in Psalm 18, verse 30, as for God, his way is perfect. As for God, his way is perfect, right? Everything he does is perfect. So let's look at the next verse here. Genesis chapter 1, verse 5. Genesis chapter 1, verse 5 says, God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. So the first thing he created was light, and the next thing he created was separating day and night. He divided the light and the darkness on earth so that half of this partially formed earth is in darkness and half of this partially formed earth is in light. And this creates the cycle of day and night that we still experience today, right? You look outside, maybe it's nighttime where you are, maybe it's daytime here, but I know that in a few hours, the light is going to darken, and the world continues to turn, and we have day and night. We have night and day in cycles of 24 hours. But this is even before the sun was created. This division of night and daytime was created by God, and it was created to give us this cycle of day and night, right? We need that cycle of day and night. So this is the end of the first day, right? It says at the end of verse 5, it says, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. Now, I think there's something interesting here, because you get into, there's lots of different theories about how long the creation took, and maybe it was 1,000 years, or maybe it was something, many years that these things happen. But if you look at the way the Bible describes it, the Bible literally describes the creation as happening one day at a time. It says there was evening and there was morning the first day. So that suggests a 24-hour cycle of time. The way that days work for us is there's evening and there's morning, right? So there's a suggestion from Genesis that this creation was a literal 6-day creation. Now, I know some people have different understandings or different interpretations of this, but if you take it based on the way the Bible describes it, the Bible literally seems to describe it as being 6 actual days. And if for you that may seem hard for you to believe or hard for you to understand, the one thing I would say to you is you need to remember that we're thinking about an all-powerful, all-knowing, eternal, ever-present God. So the question we should be asking is not, did he do it in 6 actual days? But the question maybe we should be asking is, could he have done it in 6 actual days? Well, of course he could. He's God. He's all-powerful. He could do it at the snap of his fingers if he wanted to. But so the Bible describes it as happening in 6 actual days. And, I believe by faith that God could have done it in 6 actual days. So it looks like, the way it's described in the scripture, that we have 6 actual days of creation. So let's move on now. That's the end of the first day. Let's move to the second day. The second day we can read about in Genesis 1, verses 6 through 8. So verse 6 says, and God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters, and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. Again, notice there was evening and there was morning. So again, it suggests it happened in a single day. But what's he doing here? He's got this expanse, and he separates the waters below from the waters above. Okay, what's he creating here? Well, I think in our terms we would say he's creating the atmosphere, what we know to be the atmosphere. It's something that we sometimes call the firmament, right? The firmament in these verses refers to this atmospheric space that surrounds the earth, right? And we can only see a fraction of the atmosphere when we look up in the sky. But God, merely by speaking, creates the earth's atmosphere, and it is perfect and it is complete. Now we want to remember that he separates these waters, and that some of the waters are above and some of the waters are below, and in a minute they're going to be gathered together. So that's interesting. We need to remember that some of that water was put above the firmament, above the heaven. So because that's going to come into play a little bit later. So what I want you to do now is, if you'll get your Bible and go to Jeremiah chapter 10. Jeremiah is one of the prophets, and his book is after the book of Isaiah, kind of in the middle part of your Bible. So Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 12 says, but God made the earth by his power. He founded the world by his wisdom, and he stretched out the heavens by his understanding. Okay, so what does that verse say? God created the world by his power, by his wisdom. He stretched out the heavens with his understanding. So we see on that second day the creation of the firmament, the atmosphere, and remember the water gets separated. So there's water above and there's water below. Now that water that's above, we're going to come back to in a couple of lessons. But there's also this water below. Remember, the earth in the beginning There wasn't any earth. It was just this formless void, and there was water. And now we're going to see, as we get to the next day, what he does with that water. So the atmosphere, the firmament, the heaven, that was all done on day 2. But now we come to day 3. So Genesis chapter 1, verses 9 and 10 says, "And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so." Now notice again, it begins with, "And God said," and then it ends with, "and it was so." He spoke these things into existence with his power. Verse 10, God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Again, it's all good because everything God does is good. Everything God does is perfect. Okay, so think about that. So he takes all this water and he begins to gather it and form it together, and he forms the oceans, right? And then from out of this water, he raises up this dry land, and he calls that dry land earth. And you think about it, this is all what's being prepared for us. He prepared a place for us, and it begins with us having this dry earth to live on. That's what we're going to be made for, is to live on that dry earth. But I love just thinking about all of that water being pulled and pushed and molded together to make the oceans. And you think about how powerful water is when you see a tsunami or a big hurricane. You see the force of the oceans, the force of that power. And the water is a very powerful thing. How much more powerful must our God be that he moves and molds these oceans together and forms them? So on that day, the beginning of the 3rd day, he starts with creating the oceans and the land. And then if we move on, we come to verse 11. And verse 11 says, "And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 3rd day," right? So 3rd day, God creates the ocean and the land, but he also creates the vegetation. And there's some interesting things that he says as he's creating these plants and these trees. Notice they're seed bearing, right? And so with seeds you have the ability to reproduce everything that's made, right? I can take the seed of an apple and I can plant those seeds and I can grow another apple tree. Right now, again, I think I mentioned before, I'm learning how to garden. And so I've been taking seeds from fruit and from vegetables that we have at home, and then taking those seeds and planting them in the garden. And it's amazing to me watching. I can take some pepper seeds from out of a pepper that we're cooking for dinner. I can put those seeds in the ground, and then those seeds will begin to reproduce another pepper plant like the pepper that I had. So, it's amazing that God created things to reproduce in this way. God created everything really, these things to be reproducible. So I think that that's a really fascinating thing. And seeds have, everything that they need to reproduce a plant of their kind in the same way. Now you get another really interesting phrase in this verse, and that's after their own kind. So plants are made to reproduce other plants, and plants according to their type, right? An apple seed is not going to bear you an orange tree, right? That doesn't make any sense, does it? Apples produce apple trees, or apple trees produce apples, I guess I should say. And orange trees are going to produce oranges. It's not the other way around. Everything is made to work according to the system that God designed. And again, that shows the imprint, the hand of a designer at work. It's not just chaos. It has a plan in the way that it works, in the way that it exists. So God made the plants to produce seeds, which produce more plants like the original. And each plant can only produce according to its own kind. Now again, you see the same familiar phrase. He creates these things, and what does he say when they're made? It was good, right? It was good. Everything God makes is perfect. And then again, you see that same phrase again. There was evening and there was morning, the third day, right? So again, that cycle of time. The Bible is definitely teaching us that this happened in a single day. So we can look at these plants, we can look at how they're made, and we see, God is a masterful designer. He made these things to work in a specific way, according to order. The Bible tells us that God is a God of order, not of chaos. So this tells us that he didn't do these things by chance. He didn't just throw it out there and it's going to work some strange way, right? It's going to work according to this system that he designed. Now, here's an important question for us to ask. Why? Why did God create the trees? Why did he create the plants? Why did he create the fruits and the flowers? What was the purpose of their creation? Does God need anything? Does he need trees? Does he need fruit to eat? Does he need flowers? He doesn't. He doesn't need any of that because God does not need anything. He's not dependent on anything. So why did he make these things? I think the answer that we come to is that he made these things for us. He made these things for you and for me. He made trees to create oxygen so that we can breathe, right? He made the fruit so we have things to eat, and he made them reproducible, sustainable, so our food is continuous. It will continue to be there, right? He made flowers for us to enjoy, and also flowers create the cycle of pollination and all these other things that create more flowers, enable us to live on this earth, right? These were all things that God made for us. It was designed perfectly for us, for human beings, to live on this earth because God knew and he planned for us to be here. So when we look at these aspects, we can see God is at work. He is doing something specifically for us, the people he's going to make. So now we're going to move to the fourth day. The fourth day begins in Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 to 19. So Genesis chapter 1, 14 to 19 says, "And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. So the fourth day, God spoke, and the sun and the moon and the stars were created. Now think about how powerful our sun is. Think about how hot our sun is. There's millions of nuclear explosions going on at once, and the sun has this immense gravity that holds the planets together in orbit, and it creates heat that we can enjoy on the earth and helps these things to grow. Think about the moon, right? The moon has such an impact on our tides, on the way that the oceans move, right? And yet God says the sun, the moon, and the stars, they're all created by him, created by his hand, the sun for the day, the moon, and the stars for the night. And we learn later that the stars and the sun and the moon, they help us mark seasons. They help us to navigate, like early sailors and navigators. They use the stars and the movement of the sun and the moon in the sky to help them navigate and understand which way is east, which way is west. How do I get from one place to another? All these things were given to us through the creation of the sun and the moon and the stars. Now, here's the interesting thing. When the sun and the moon and the stars were created, on the day that they were created, how old were they? Well, they were a day old, right? They were created on that day. And yet, if you look at the sun and the moon and the stars, and you understand that while they say that the moon's light has to travel in order for us to see it, and the light of the sun, the light of those stars has to travel through space for us to be able to see it. So, scientists would tell us that while those stars and the moon and the sun are very, very, very old, and the light that we're seeing is old light from, thousands of years ago. But I think the teaching, the way that the Bible would say it to us, that what the Bible is actually showing us is that the sun and the moon and the stars were only a day old on the day that they were created, but they had the appearance of age, right? They appeared to be older than they were. I mean, you think about when God created mountains, okay? Well, how old were the mountains when he created them? Well, they were a day old also. How old was the fully formed fruit tree when it was made? Did it start as a seed and then it grew up? No, it says he created the fruits and the trees and everything. And they looked probably much older than they actually were because they were actually only a day old, right? Or later on in our next lesson, we'll learn about Adam and Eve. When Adam was created, was he a baby? Did he grow from a baby? No, it says he was created as a man. He probably looked like he was about 25 or 30 years old. But in reality, he was only a day old. So the things that God made have the appearance of age when they're created, but they're not actually maybe as old as they look because they're only a day old. So the whole universe was created so that it was fully functioning in the way that God intended it to function throughout all of time. Now, it didn't take this long period of time to get it. At least that's not how the Bible describes it to us. The Bible describes it to us as happening all in a day. So the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the other spheres and things out in the universe were placed in the places that God chose them to be, right? All of this is held together by his great power. They say that if the earth was a little bit closer to the sun, it wouldn't be possible for us to live on the earth. If the sun was a little bit further away from if the earth was a little bit further away from the sun, even I think it's just a few inches further away, it would not be habitable for us as human beings, right? He organized the other planets in the system the way that he intended these things to be. He built a perfect system, right? And God didn't have to travel from one place or another to put them into place. He was able to speak them all into existence, even though these stars and these planets may be, very, very, very far away. For God, it's no matter, right? God is not within the creation. He's outside of the creation, and he's able to arrange it exactly the way that he wants. In Jeremiah 23, verses 23 and 24, it says, "Am I a God near at hand and not a God afar off? Do I not fill heaven and earth?" Remember, God is everywhere. He is omnipresent. So he's here with us, and he can even be, in a very great distance away. He is everywhere. Right? We cannot imagine how immense this universe is, and yet God fills everything, right? He is everywhere at once, right? And even though he is everywhere at once, he is distinct from the universe. He is not the universe. He is separate from the universe. So it's all created by God. It's not that he is inside of it, right? The idea that God is everything and everything is God is a concept, it's a religious idea that is not in any way taught by the Bible. It's a completely incorrect assumption that we can, that God is somehow in the tree or in nature. He's not. He's separate from these things because he is the one who created them. He is the author of all these things. So he made the sun and the moon and the stars, and he created them to follow an orderly pattern, to work in a certain way. Now think about in your life, has there ever been a day that the sun didn't come up in the morning? Has there ever been a day that the sun didn't go down at the end of the day or the moon didn't come up, right? No. Every day of your life, the sun has risen in the sky in the morning and it's gone down at night. Every single morning, the sun rises in the east, it sets in the west. This system has not been disrupted. It continues to work exactly the way that God designed it to work from the beginning of creation. Now, there are some stories in the Bible where the Lord stopped the sun in place for a period of time, or he moved it back or moved it forward. He could do that. But for us, we've never seen a day where the sun didn't come up in the morning and set at night. God created the system, and it continues to run exactly the way that God designed it. And it is a reliable system, right? We can expect that we're going to get summer and fall and winter and springtime, and that helps us to know when we can plant our gardens and grow fruits and vegetables, and it helps us to understand how the tides work and when are appropriate times to take ships out and circumnavigate the globe and things like that. All of this is because we have a system that's reliable, that was created by a God who is orderly and wise and intelligent and knowledgeable. And he designed an intelligent system. So I want us now to look at another psalm. We're going to look at Psalm 104, verse 19. Psalm 104, verse 19 says, "He made the moon to mark the seasons, and the sun knows when to go down." Right? He made the moon to mark the season, and the sun knows when to go down. God is a God of order. He created these things to follow an orderly system. So let's move on now. We finished day 4. Let's look at the 5th day of creation. The 5th day we can read about in Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 to 23. So it says, "And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth and across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the 5th day. Okay, so the 5th day, what does he create? He creates the birds, and he creates the marine life, the ocean life. Okay, now the waters teemed with creatures, swarmed with all kinds of creatures, right? And again, he creates all of these creatures, be it creatures in the water or creatures that fly in the air or even the plants, the vegetation. He all creates them according to their kind, right? They fit into a certain pattern, okay? So sharks are going to give birth to other sharks, and salmon are going to give birth to other salmon, right? A shark could not reproduce a salmon, right? These things don't go together. They are different kinds. So everything is made to fit according to its kind. That makes sense. Again, it's an orderly system, an orderly pattern. Even that phrase, "according to its kind," is repeated 10 times in the 1st chapter of Genesis, right? And this is really telling us about DNA, right? The DNA of these organisms is programmed in a way that they're only going to be able to reproduce organisms that have that same structure of DNA. That's part of the program. Now, the other thing I think is really cool about this passage is God is creating life, right? He's creating living things, right? If you've ever gone scuba diving or snorkeling and you've looked under the water in the ocean, you see that it's just filled with life, all kinds of colorful fish, crabs, and different kinds of creatures living under the sea. And in the same way, you can look up at the sky and see all kinds of different birds of different type, birds that fly from one place of the world to the other, and they're alive. They're filled with life, and God knows them, and God sees them, and he created and designed each one of them. I remember one time going to the aquarium in Chicago, Illinois, and they had this awesome display of deep sea fish from the very depths of the ocean. And I was walking through the display and I was amazed because these fish that were from the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean that human beings would never be able to swim down to just to see. And yet there are these fish from the very bottom of the ocean, and they were incredibly colorful, like purple and yellow and greens and red, just intensely beautiful creatures. And I thought, why on earth would a creature that's from the very depths of the ocean be so incredibly beautiful? Who is going to be there to witness the beauty of this creature? But then I think, well, of course, this is something that the Lord made, and he enjoys it himself in the way that he made it, right? He made some of these things for his enjoyment, and then now we have the technology and the ability to see just how beautiful those things are. But for thousands upon thousands of years of life on this earth, nobody could ever have seen those fish until now, and it's only now that we see how beautiful they are. Now, only God could create a living creature, right? Human beings, we don't have the ability to, we have the ability to reproduce according to our kind, but we couldn't create out of nothing our own living creature. right? We can't create out of nothing, speak things into existence the way that God does. Only God has the ability to create anything. So the fifth day, he creates marine life and he creates the birds. Now we're going to move to the sixth day, right? And the sixth day is the last day we're going to look at today. And on the sixth day, we can read from Genesis chapter 1, verse 24. And it says, "And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kind, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so, right? God said, and it was so. Verse 25, "And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." So on this day, the sixth day, he creates just an inconceivable number of animals and living creatures. I mean, think about all the different types of animals there are in the world. I mean, there's animals in places like the rainforest, insects and bugs and snakes and things like that we've never even seen before, right? And yet God just creates the vastness of all of these living things, livestock and just all kinds of beasts of the earth. Again, creating them all according to their kinds. They will reproduce according to their kinds. Dogs are going to reproduce other dogs, right? And cats are going to reproduce other cats. A dog doesn't reproduce a cat because it's not its kind. So everything reproduces according to its kind. And again, as it has said, with each step of the way, and it was good, because everything God makes is good. In the beginning, when he made them, everything was perfect. So every aspect of creation reveals things about God to us. You might remember that I said to you before that the Bible tells us that we can know about God just by looking at creation. This is what we call general revelation. Anybody can know things about God just by looking at creation. We can see the way the sun and the moon and the stars move around, and we can understand that God is a God of order, that there is a design, a pattern to the way the universe works. We can see how powerful God is when we look at the power of the oceans moving around and we think about him moving and molding and forming those oceans together, right? We can see just how knowing he is, how intelligent he is, and the way that he designed every single living creature. Why is it that birds are able to fly and fish are able to swim in the sea? Well, they're equipped in a specific way where fish have gills in order to enable them to breathe underwater, and birds have bones that are very lightweight, and they have wings and feathers, and they're created in a way to be aerodynamic so that they can fly through the air, right? This is all evidence of God's wisdom and God's intelligence, right? And his power at work. We can also see that God is omnipresent because we have a universe that is very expansive, very, very large, and it is filled with all kinds of things. And yet God is there. He created it all, and he is all present in the midst of it all. The whole universe reflects the work of the master designer. I want to read to you now Psalm 19, verse 1. Psalm 19:1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of the Lord. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge." Right? The heavens declare the work of the Lord. You can look at the skies and see just the beauty. I mean, do you ever stop and just look up at the sky and just see just how beautiful everything is? I mean, that shows you something about God. Do you ever look up at the stars at night and just see how vast and how beautiful they can be? That's showing you something about God, about what God is like, right? We're surrounded by all of this evidence of God's existence. Romans chapter 1, verse 20 says this. It says, "Since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead." Again, this is that idea of general revelation. There are things about God that are revealed to all people. that are available for all people to see so that they will know that there is a God in the universe, right? So we can all notice the hand of the master designer. We can all see the creator's hand in everything that he has made. Now, that general revelation is one thing. We can know about God. But the other thing that we need is we need specific knowledge about God. And that's knowledge that we get from the Bible. That's what we call special revelation, right? Special revelation is what enables us to really know God, know what God is like and who God is. And that's why he gave us the Word. That's why he gave us the Bible, so we can deeply understand him and know how to follow him. So today's lesson, we looked at the 6 days of creation and all of the different things that God made and what that reveals about his character and who he is. Now, in our next lesson, next week, we're going to learn about the creation of Adam and Eve and how they were made. They were also made on the 6th day. And that will bring us to the end of our study of the 6 days of creation, and then we'll move on to something else. So I hope you guys are well. Please feel free to send me a comment or send me a note, or if you have questions about anything that we've studied with, you can always contact me via line or via email. And I'm glad to be with you guys. I pray God will bless you and watch over you, and we'll see you next time.